Today I'm creating a video in oil pastel creating a sphere. And before I get started, I have all of my oil pastels that are wrapped. I have another piece of paper that is underneath my paper I'm working on to act as a placemat to collect any oil pastel crumblies to protect my table. And I also have another sheet of paper I'm going to use as a scribble off paper to clean my oil pastels before we get started. You'll notice that I have two spheres that are traced already, and I didn't do the best job in the world with tracing these. All I used was the bottom of a cup that's right here, and I traced those. You can trace them in pencil. I traced them in Sharpie for you just so you could see them. And I have two of them. One is my demonstration sphere to share with you how to sketch out lightly your lines, just so you have an idea of how to curve your strokes as you shade this in. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do before I get started, before I forget, is to clean off my oil pastels. And as you guys know, oil pastels are very super sticky. So what you want to do when you clean them off is obviously use another piece of paper, and you just want to rub the outside of your oil pastel and also the tip onto another piece of paper. I also use this paper as my dump paper, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Anytime I have oil pastel crumblies on my original paper, periodically throughout the process of shading it in, I'll dump any oil pastel crumblies off onto this paper, and then they go directly in the trash. All right, so what I'm doing right now is just cleaning off my oil pastels. And again, I'm trying to get the outside, rub off the outside and also the top of these till they're completely clean. And the reason for that is these pick up all kinds of other pieces of oil pastel, and then you get like a weird random streak of something in your work, and it's gross and very disheartening. So these look good to start. So I'm going to put this piece of paper aside. And I have both of my circles traced. We're going to transform these from a shape, which is a two-dimensional, something that's two-dimensional, into a form, or create the illusion of form, and form is three-dimensional. Now, the first thing I'm going to do in order to transform this from a circle, which is a shape, into a sphere, which is a form, is I am going to, as lightly as I possibly can in pencil, create what I call training wheels. And these are longitude lines. These are like longitude lines on a globe. So I'm going to just put a little mark at the top and the bottom here, and I am going to sketch out a series of curved lines that go across my globe, or my circle here, to make it look more globe-like. And this will remind me how to curve my strokes as I work in the oil pastel. Okay, so I am going to very, very lightly, because I'm going to shade on top of these, connect the top to the bottom. And as I have, because this is the one that is furthest from the center and it's closest to the outside, it is the most curved. As I go across, connecting top to the bottom, a little bit less of a curve. Okay, so I have this one that's very curved, this one that's less curved. As I do this section here, I'm going to go ahead and connect one from the top to the bottom, and it's more curved toward the outside, because again, this side is the most curved, so this is slightly less curved. And this one here connects top to the bottom, closest to the middle, least curved. Okay, so almost straight up and down. You can draw more of these. I just don't want to waste our time. But this is just going to give you reminder on how to curve your strokes, okay, as you go across. Now, what's important in turning a shape into a form, so circle to sphere, is we want to do two things. So thing number one is we want to curve our strokes in our oil pastel as we go across the space, okay? So we want the outside to be the most curved and the center to be the most straight up and down. We also want to adjust our pressure as we go across, all right? So we want the outermost edges of our sphere to be the darkest. We want kind of towards the center to be a little bit lighter. And that'll help kind of create highlights, midtones, and shadows to start to make this look three-dimensional. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to keep this dark toward the outside, lighter in the center, and I want you all to follow along with me. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start by curving my strokes the most toward the outside. And I'm also pressing the hardest here with my oil pastel. As I go across, I'm going to gradually let up the pressure. I'm also going to curve my strokes less. Okay, so I'm letting up the pressure, and I'm using these lines underneath as a guide. Note that you can't really see them very well because I made them white. Now, as I get to the center, I'm keeping it really super light here. And what I'm going to do at this point, because I'm lazy and it's easier for me to go on this, because I'm right-handed, it's easier for me to do the left side. I'm going to go ahead and flip my paper and do the exact same thing I just did. So I'm going to press hard here on the outside. Most curve right, and as I go gradually across my shape, I'm going to let up the pressure. As I go across the shape, I'm almost straight up and down in the middle. Okay, so I have something that looks like this. Okay, to start us off with. All right, I'm gonna flip this around because it's driving me crazy. All right, so this is the beginning of my sphere. Now, before I do anything else, so just a reminder, I have my harder pressure toward the edges, most curved, led up to medium pressure, lightest pressure toward the center. I flipped my paper halfway through because it was easiest for me. What I'm going to do at this point is I am going to attempt to add some of the parts of the sphere similar to our video that we watched on how to create highlights, midtones, and core shadow, also some reflected highlights on our sphere to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. So what we're going to do is try and make this right here look a little bit more like this right here. Okay, so notice with this, you have the highlight here. You have some mid-tone here, okay, which are tones that are a little bit darker than the highlight, all right, to transition us into the core shadow that's right here. So the core shadow is the darkest part on the object itself. And then toward the end, we're going to add a little bit of reflected highlight, hopefully around our sphere. The reflected highlight is just the light that bounces back onto the object from the surface that it's sitting on. I'm not going to bother adding the shadow itself onto mine, although you are more than welcome to do that, okay? Let me get you guys settled back down here. All right, so at this point in time, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to add a little bit more tone, a little bit more value, so darker parts to this to make it match the one that is on my screen. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use, sorry, this is bothering me. I'm going to use my oil pastel. I'm going to curve my strokes as I do this and make this part a little bit darker. Okay, I'm going to curve my strokes backward. And you'll notice that I'm deepening this part here to create my midtones before I add my second color. So I'm giving it another layer of color. I'm just deepening it ever so slightly. And again, I'm curving my strokes. So in the center, I am the most straight up and down, also the lightest. And I'm also deepening this edge here to make it match a little bit more of the core shadow. I'm deepening a little bit more of this edge here. So just a reminder, the darker you want this to be, you're going to press harder with your oil pastel. Okay. All right. So I'm pressing harder, most curved toward the outside. All right. Now at this point in time, I'm deepening this part ever so slightly for my midtone. So I'm pressing a little bit less hard here. And I'm pressing my lightest right in here. Again, curving my strokes. Okay, so this is kind of what I have so far for my my tones. So I have the start of my highlight here. I have my mid-tones, which is my tones that are slightly deeper right in here. And then I have my core shadow, which is the darkest part on the object, which is right here towards the bottom where it's resting on the table. I think the last part I'm going to add my reflected highlight with my white. So at this point I have my base fade, what I would call my base fade, done on here, and I'm ready to add my second color, all right, which is my white. So I'm going to blend it into white. And the reason why I'm doing that is I want to make sure I have a highlight that is pretty strong, so it looks the most three-dimensional. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to curve my strokes in just this area here. I'm going to press kind of hard. And as I curving my strokes kind of from the top down, and I'm pressing harder here to match this highlight that's on my screen right now. So the light source is coming from above, so the highlight will be here at the top. And as I go down my sphere, since I'm working in the center here, I'm going to keep it, my strokes almost straight up and down, but as I curve out here, I'm going to curve them a little bit more. Again, trying to match my piece I'm drawing from. All right, so this is what I have so far. All right, now what I'm going to do real quick before I add my reflected highlight back in is I am going to do a sweep with my blue, and all that means is I'm going to come back over top and attempt to bring back some of those midtones because I pressed really hard with my white. Okay, because again, I want this to look like an oil painting. Like I really want it to look less like crayon, more like an oil painting. So I pressed hard with it. So I'm going to come back in and bring back in those midtones. So really right in here, I should have my middle range values. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to curve my strokes. I'm going to press lightly. And I'm going to think about which way I'm curving my strokes and how hard I'm pressing. So right now I'm pressing harder toward the outside, and I'm going to let it up as I go toward the center. And what I'm doing is I'm gradually working some of that mid-tone back in. So you'll notice that right in here, it's a little bit deeper than it was before. Sweet. Okay, now the last thing before I do anything else is I'm going to go ahead, before I forget, I'm gonna dump some of these crumblies onto my scratch off dump paper. So anytime you accumulate too much of these, feel free to do that. And I'm going to add my reflected highlight back in. All right. So I have a little bit more of, I have my core shadow here. So this is the darkest place that's on my object itself. It's not super dark on this. I don't have another color I'm bringing in. But this is the darkest part, my mid-tone here, my highlight, which is on my object. And then what I'm going to do right now is add my reflective highlight in. So what this means is I'm going to add a little bit of white, pressing hard toward the outside. Okay. And this is the light that bounces back on the object from the surface it's sitting on. Actually, that looks pretty cool. I'm going to add a little bit more of deeper tone here. I didn't clear that in. Adding a little bit more of my core shadow right in here. Okay, so at this point, here is what I have. This actually isn't bad. Let me share with you what's going on. I'm going to dump this real quick. I have... Sorry, y'all. Actually, that looks pretty good. It's not too shabby. So what I have here is I have my highlight. Okay, which sort of matches this highlight here. I have my mid-tone right here, which is my middle values, right? So my medium pressure mixed with the white right in there. I don't have as much core shadow here as this example, so it would be cool to deepen that, maybe even get a darker blue to bring in there, to deepen that, to make it look more 3D. And then I also have my reflected highlight right here, which is that little bit of light that comes back, bounces back on the object from the table. So this is what I have so far. Give it a shot. You saw all my layers. You saw me curving my strokes, adjusting my pressure accordingly. Give it a shot and try and match the example. Good luck.